It was in November of 2001 when my dad broke his neck in 4 places. He was in intensive care for a while, and the doctors said to us as a family that he needed surgery. And without the surgery, he wouldn't live, but with the surgery, he had a 50% chance of living or dying. So it was a decision that we went through, and we were concerned about his outcome. He survived the surgery and in intensive care for a while afterwards. When we were finally able to see him, the only fluids he had or nourishment he had for almost several days was just an IV fluid. And when he came to from that surgery, it was as if he finally woke up and he was alert to understand what had happened and how he broke his neck. He had this halo around his head with holes in his head drilled to keep his neck in place. During that time, a Eucharistic minister came in from the local parish and asked my family if we wanted to receive communion, and also asked my dad. Well, the nurse was there, and she was concerned because he had not swallowed yet, being in intensive care and having surgery. So he sort of did this test with this nurse to make sure he could swallow and stick out his tongue, and he did. And he received Eucharist for the first time after waking up from the surgery that gave him life after that fall. He went on to live for 9 years after a broken neck in a nursing home. His only task that he could do was to love. This man who worked construction all his life and worked with his hands was rendered helpless from his neck down. And yet, the life that he lived in those 9 years was full of life and love. That was all he could give, and he gave freely and generously. In today's gospel, the story happens after the feeding of the multitudes, of the several thousand with bread and fish. And Jesus encounters the crowd, and they are hungry. They're saying, give us more. Who are you? You are a healer. You are the Messiah. And Jesus says, you come after me because you hunger for bread, but hunger for that which gives you life, that is eternal, that lives forever. And they say, give us this bread. Give us this living bread. And Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Hunger for bread that gives life. Work for food that is eternal, that goes on, that endures forever. And in this gospel, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Jesus says, I am that eternal bread that is love. This week, let us be mindful of how we serve and how we give and how we love for one another, and how we pay attention to love that is eternal. How we work in our work and in our living, in our being with one another. How do we serve in love that endures? For in the end, that's all we have. That's what my dad taught me in the last years of his life. When there's nothing left that we can physically work with in our bodies, love endures. In that same way, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of love that is eternal and lives and endures forever. Let us work for that in small ways with one another in our ordinary lives that we live this week. Amen.